Thinking what's on your mind today? Give it all away. Move outside the limits. They can't steal your wisdom. You know just as well as I that if we know our roots, then we can fly. They try to hold us down, but we get free with what we have found. I'm expressing that in all the fullness, all the change. You can't hold me to an image. I'm not static. I don't stay the same. I witness the seasons. I've seen nights turn to day. It's how I know that this shit's a lie. I have felt the flow saying move this way. Move how you were made to. Don't let the last sedate you. You came here to reclaim you and all the inner codes God gave you. Hi, I am Miya Fowler. I'm a dancer, choreographer, essayist, poet, and music artist. My work explores ancient, ancestral, and spiritual wisdom held in, accessed, and expressed through our material bodies. In terms of the ancient, ancestral, and spiritual, those can all be the same things. And then sometimes there are distinctions, but I use artistic media to approach questions and to theorize about my experience and sense of self within and outside of political and social structures. So liberation, or thinking about my liberation, asking questions about it, and expressing how it feels and looks like to me, that's necessarily a part of the exploration that I do with my artistic work. And there's also kind of this integration, I think, of the academic and the artistic, although I don't like to talk about them as if they're polar opposites, or the academic and the spiritual as polar opposites, but they are often like constructed that way. So I see my artwork as kind of this intermediary and the meeting point of the two, of the academic and the spiritual, because they both can live there and they both can be expressed in that way. It wasn't something that I considered to be like an academic pursuit until I got to College of Charleston. So when I got to Charleston, I knew that I wanted to continue dance. So I linked with a neo-traditional West African drum and dance company there. And by neo-traditional, I mean the traditional dances and rhythms that are taken out of their traditional and ritual context and adapted to stages. So they become, performance, which has a whole long history behind it, which is a part of something that I've explored in my academic work as well. So I was involved in that community, and through that community, I also met another dance researcher, who told me that if I wanted to be a professional dancer, then I needed to be trained And really what that meant was that I needed a foundation in like ballet, modern, Western styles of dance. And so that I should pick up a dance minor at the college. Now, even this conversation was really kind of like a turning point for me in terms of how I was looking at and thinking about dance. But it kind of started before then too, because there were just these questions of, well, the style of dance that I do and the ways that I have moved my body and learned to move my body like throughout my life, it doesn't really seem to be space for that in the academic environment, because dance is so often conceived, thought of as like ballet being the foundation of all dance. So that conversation really did set off a series of questions that I was then able to explore once I did get into the dance minor. Now, of course, I had already been in political science and African American studies classes. So I'm already kind of like thinking critically about a lot of things in terms of like culture and aesthetics and social justice and just what that looks like. And so there seemed to be a way that the dance program was kind of reinforcing this idea that certain cultures, particularly Western white culture, is more valued and that it's important. It's what fits into this academic space. So throughout the time in the dance program, I was thinking about that, writing papers on it, even just the way that like learning dance pedagogy, like the way that we were being taught to teach dance and to, you know, pass on dance and technique to others, it still had this very much like Western base. It was basically a pedagogy to reinforce what was already there, which was the Western white aesthetic and the priority that Western culture holds in the academic space. So as I'm doing the research in these classes and thinking about dance, thinking about the ways that all of my different interests, you know, African American studies, political science, dance, the ways that they're all thinking or working together, the ways that they all link together, I started looking at what recognizing embodied like cultural and aesthetic links, what that does in terms of legitimizing, in a sense, the kinds of dance and movement styles that I'd grown up doing and had been introduced to by way of this neo-traditional West African drum and dance company. So there was just a way that my time in Charleston and at the College of Charleston in this specific drum and dance community, and then some other like spiritual aspects that came out of that involvement in the community, like the introduction to African traditional religions and a larger consideration of African diasporic religions. That component was also like at play too. So there was just a lot integrated into my study of dance and study of like culture and, you know, different identities that I held that are, you know, I have to express them day in and day out because I'm in, you know, this particular body. So that, I think that time there was just what kind of jump started this consideration of like embodied roots, ROOTS, and then also roots, ROUTES, and how that is exemplified, how those paths are exemplified by Black dancers and how it is politically and culturally significant because the issue that I was observing with whose bodies and whose dance styles and whose cultures seem to be valued and seem to be academically relevant.
They intercept the messages, send us all of the references for how to play the rhythm. We speak the language, so we read it well. We say the things they couldn't tell, then we flow to the wisdom.
Choosing to Union Institute and University, choosing a distance learning program to pursue my master's, that was a very deliberate and like necessary decision, because I already had the idea that if I wanted to do any kind of, pursue any degree beyond undergrad, and I wanted to do dance research, I just didn't feel like I would be able to go into like a quote unquote traditional program and find the dance styles that I needed to find what it is that I wanted to actually, research and immerse myself in. So I chose Union because I wanted to be able to be in the community, in a West African drum and dance community. So during the time, I was introduced to these two terms, embodiment and arts-based research. And then, so I said two terms, but then three terms. So there was also somatics. It was the looking at embodiment and arts-based research and figuring out how to do those, or how to incorporate those into my studies, that led me into somatics theory and practice, and trying to understand a little bit more about what that is. So somatics, just a very simple definition. It's the study of the soma, and the soma is the body as perceived from within by the first person, as opposed to just body itself, which is considered like a third person object. Now, I also kind of took issue with this distinction as well, because thinking about my identities, thinking about being Black, being a woman, being queer, being Southern, being American, being descended from enslaved people, I really felt like, well, there's no way to make this a clear-cut distinction. I can't always just perceive myself from the first person, from inside of myself, for my like literal safety, and my ability to move through this world. I have to also consider how I am being perceived by other people. So I was kind of just looking for ways to bring that first person and third person perspective together. And so the somatics kind of became like a really integral part of my work in that way, because I wanted to find what is this third space look like, this third space of perhaps the meeting of the first and third, not that it makes them identical, but that there's some kind of like meeting point of those. And so I was exploring that question, and may have tried to answer it in my thesis. Of course, now in 2022, removed from 2019, I look back at that work and am not sure that I have answered the question. I may have answered some questions, but with answers, new questions always arrive, which has been that's been a part of a big lesson of both my academic work and my artistic work. And so it's kind of, and my spirit work. So it's kind of the way that they all three meet, that even with some answers, more questions arise. And even with those answers, they are subject to change. But anyway, that work, that's how somatics became a part of the work, trying to answer that question of how to bring together the first and third person perspective of my body. So that was also a time where I realized that I was like quite literally like dancing my questions and literally moving through those questions and allowing the movement itself to be an act of theorizing. So that was pretty important to the creation of what became the code's self-reflection. So elements of the code's self-reflection, those started coming up before and during my time at Union. And really, it started with the music because music and dance are so intimately connected and like inseparable in a lot of ways, but then also specifically when it comes to neo-traditional or traditional West African dance, you know, the drummer and the dancer, the drum and the movement, they are in constant communication. They are, you know, telling each other what to do and just kind of always in this flux and flow. Yeah, so like I said, there's the music element of it, which, you know, I said I didn't know what I was making the music for at the time that I was making it. But yeah, I was making the music. And so then it becomes clear here, like, okay, it's for this. In terms of my music, I like to have kind of a, like, sort of an ethereal sound. yeah, the music component of that project, having I like to use my voice to create a lot of sounds because, like I said, I'm not really like an instrumentalist, but I have always been involved in the vocal aspect of music. You know, I grew up singing on the church choir, also did like chorus and things like that in elementary and middle school. So yeah, I've created this music and it's just really a lot of the, I guess, like spiritual concepts and ideas that I'm exploring. And so I feel like there are some of the songs in the codes, I feel like it's kind of like the voice of my highest self, you know, speaking to me about the journey that I'm on, about the path that I'm on, about this exploration of myself and of my roots and of my paths. And then there's also the movement. So some of the movement in the codes is choreographed, and then some of it is improvised. Particularly, so I said that, you know, improv is so much a part of, you know, my dance work. And it's because there has to be a way for me to see what is coming, or there has to be a way for me to see what comes without, again, imposing my will on it, which is what typically happens when I am in a choreographic process. I am trying to say, okay, here's the vision, here's what you need to do, here's what you need to make happen. And so a lot of times what happens is that I slip into a lot of the same ideas that I'm trying to resist, which is that dance has to look a certain way. You have to move with a certain aesthetic and a certain flow in order for it to be considered legitimate and for it to be considered, you know, good dancing. And so sometimes that happens during my choreographic process to where I'm not even able to really get anything out because I'm so focused on, well, this probably doesn't look the way that it should. So improv has become not only a part of improv has had to become not only a part of the choreographic process in order for me to allow what needs to emerge from my body to emerge, but it's also very much a part of the performance aspect as well, because you find things that you didn't know were coming when you just surrender to what your body wants to do, what it is doing. You find that the movement is what needs to happen. And so that was very much something, looking back at the codes and like what my cousin and I put together, the conversation that happens, there's a conversation in the codes where, you know, my grandma is giving me some history, some family history. And so, you know, about my people coming up, the line, that particular line of the family coming up from Charleston, Georgetown, from the Low Country area. And so that is where the improvised movement, or part of the improvised movement, came into the codes. And so
Cause they dad was cheating.
So he was Seminole.
Yeah, they were black, jet
Oh, not African.
black. Well, you don't know.
Oh,
You don't know because they had real high cheekbones.
yeah, that's African. That's African. That's an African trait, not just Native American.
It's not.
Like high cheekbones and eyes like mine are African.
Slant. How you find that?
Your great grandparents. No, that would be your grandparents.
They come on ship through Georgetown. I know that.
So your grandparents.
Yeah, came on ship through Georgetown County. Then they come up to Lawrence County. And that's when they hung Henry McDaniel.
Who is that?
That was one of the McDaniel boys. They hung him because he said shit to a white woman. They got him out of bed and hung him. That's when they started scattering.
Oh,
They
so
was slipping out.
so who was McDaniel?
He was Henry McDaniel.
But he was black. But the McDaniel name comes from who?
Joel McDaniel.
Joel McDaniel.
Joel McDaniel. Nathan McDaniel. Oh, what?
Them was the white people?
Yeah.
Joel and Nathan McDaniel. So
Look at the Whalers. The Whalers had some McDaniel slaves too.
because they bought them from the McDaniels?
Yeah, bought them from Joel in Georgetown County.
That's in Virginia, right?
Georgetown.
Wait, that's South Carolina.
South
Georgetown.
Carolina.
Yeah.
Georgetown County. See,
That's
they
near
kept-
Charleston.
Charleston and Georgetown, just right a few miles from each other.
So the McDaniel line comes from the Low Country.
Mm-hmm.
Oh. Like I said, roots and roots are very much a part of this story. It's not a story to be told linear, like in a line. It's not a story that can go from point A to point B. And so I try to include that there because I think that's also one of the things that like nonlinearity and just kind of the way that things always come back around, that's been very much a part of what understanding my sense of self and my identities, that's been very much a part of what that is, seeing that it is not a point A to point B story, and it cannot be told in that way, and I cannot understand myself in that way. I have to look at the paths. I have to look at all of the paths that have brought me to a point, to a particular point. And then I have to look at all of the paths that lead from that particular point too. So understanding my identity as a Black woman, as a queer person, as American, as Southern, as, you know, from Greenville, as descended from African people, descended from enslaved people, I have to recognize that even root, R-O-O-T, is not a singular kind of thing. Like a root is a network. And then also the R-O-U-T-E roots are also like networks and paths. And so all that to say that what I've tried to convey in the codes is all of that movement, all of that traveling and, you know, going around and just the different ways that conversation with people like my grandma, having rituals where I am communicating with my ancestral spirits, communicating with my highest self, and then also just insights from African traditional religions, African diasporic religions, whatever my, you know, spiritual practices, day in and out, and everything that's integrated into it. Those are things that have had to be a part of understanding myself. Not to suggest that I have it all figured out. I do not. But I would never be able to understand some of the ways that I can bring, going back to that first and third person. I need all of those things to find that meeting point, to find the release point, where I am both aware that I am inside of a system that is oppressive to me, systems that are oppressive to me, and the ways that those are working and the ways that other people might see me. At the same time that I have to see myself, and I have to ask how I'm seeing myself, and I have to kind of get outside of those systems. So in the sense that when I think about liberation in terms of my life and just also in terms of my work, my artwork, and what liberation looks and feels like, there's a way that it is, the goal is to see plans for the future. And then there's also a way that it's a right now kind of thing. And I think that's where like the outside of kind of comes in. But I can only find that outside of if I'm willing to explore the third person and the first person and how those are flowing in and out of each other. And so I think that's something that happens with the codes as well. And, you know, it also has to do with my understanding of my role as an artist. This is something else that I think the codes has given me. There's a way that I think that artists are like the kind of like the intermediary between like the recipe for creation and the structure and stability of that which is created. So I think art is kind of like reflection in a sense. And so hadn't made this connection yet, but maybe that's the reason that, or part of the reason that this particular aspect of the codes is self-reflection. I do anticipate there being more aspects to come and for me to, I guess, like give life to. I think that's a good place to end there on the codes, self-reflection, and what it means to be an artist, and what it has meant for me to create that piece.
We've been here since the beginning, coming from the stars, trying to align a crooked living. It ain't possible. No, it ain't possible. You're not crazy, you're aligned with the natural law of your existence. It ain't lazy to refuse all the nonsense work you've been given. Burn it all down. It can all go. I know what I found. I'm in my soul's home. Don't let them steal you. You've got tools to survive. Look at how we're resilient. We don't drown, we just ride. You've got the spirit of life running through your veins. You've got infinite light when you call on your ancestors' names. Call them out, call your energy in. Lay down.